You hear it before you see it. The breeze moves gently over the grass, tugging at tall stalks like a careful hand turning pages. There is no thunder of hooves, no clash of swords, just a steady whisper of wind across a forgotten hill, the occasional bleat of sheep who seems entirely unimpressed by human drama, and somewhere far off, the creak of old wood, probably a cart, possibly your knees. You're standing at the edge of a battlefield that never quite became one. And that's the first secret we'll share tonight. The sky is dim, the kind of dull gray that never quite makes up its mind. It could be dawn or dusk or something between. But either way, you're stuck under it, cloaked in itchy wool and wondering where all the fighting went. You tug your hood up, adjust your belt pouch, and start walking. The grass is damp. Not enough to soak your socks, but just enough to ensure mild discomfort for the next 6 hours. Welcome to 14th century England, where everything is slightly soggy and rebellion is more of suggestion. It's 1381, and you wandered into the Peasants' Revolt. Only the word revolt feels a bit misleading. There are no screaming mobs in this field, no chaos or carnage. Just campfires flickering like fireflies, and men try to sharpen things that really weren't designed to be weapons. A rake, for example, and a spoon with ambition. You watch as someone swings a broken side at a log, misses entirely, then pretends they meant to do that. You probably won't make it through this day, not because of violence, but because you might die of historical underwhelm. And yet, there's something oddly comforting about it. No frantic charges, no bloody banners, just tired people in wet shoes arguing about taxes. Breathe in. The air smells like loam and onions. A few yards away, someone's boiling cabbage with the determination of a man at war with vegetables. Someone else is hammering nails into a wheelbarrow. Another is trying to organize a meeting, but no one wants to attend. A very medieval problem. You feel the rough wool on your neck, the ache in your legs from marching too far with too little food. You weren't born for rebellion. Not really. But here you are, pitchfork in hand, following Wat Tyler, a name that sounds like it belongs to a polite shoemaker, but who is, in fact, the de facto leader of this disgruntled crowd. Here's your first fact of the evening. The revolt began in Essex and Kent, triggered by yet another poll tax, this one the third in 4 years. Designed to pay for the 100 Years' War, it was flat rate. Everyone pays the same, rich or poor. Imagine asking the lord of the manor and the village rat catcher to both fork over 12 pence. One can sell wool, the other barely owns a sock. Interestingly, despite its name, the Peasants' Revolt wasn't composed mostly of peasants. The driving force? Artisans, tradesmen, small landowners. Folks with just enough money to know how much they were losing. The poor were angry. The slightly less poor were organized. And that, as you know, is the beginning of all good trouble. Now, for your obscure cultural tidbit. Medieval rebels had a curious tradition of carrying religious banners into battle, even when the battle wasn't happening. Some groups paraded behind icons of local saints, while loudly demanding the heads of tax collectors. Nothing says divine justice like a painting of St. Cuthbert flapping in the wind next to a guy named Rob who sells onions. You trudge forward. The path dips, then rises. A man walks past you with a sack of something unlabeled, possibly grain, possibly rocks. You do not ask. You nod. And he nods back, because that's the proper amount of small talk when wearing weapons in public. Historians still debate whether Wat Tyler truly wanted a systemic overhaul, or if he was swept up in a populist moment that spiraled beyond his control. There are letters, contradictory reports, one odd poem involving a talking rooster, and no shortage of clerics who claim divine insight. No one agrees, but everyone seems very sure. You step over a patch of mud and wonder if you've gone in a circle. You probably have. But so has history. The quiet fields, the simmering rage, the bureaucrats who pretend not to see it. All of it feels oddly familiar, doesn't it? If your eyes are still open, and no judgment if they're not, go ahead and gently tap that like button. It tells the algorithm you enjoy slow-burning uprisings and moderately interesting rebellions. Consider subscribing if you'd like to fall asleep to more stories like this. And, hey, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I like to imagine all the little rooms glowing quietly around the world. Tiny lanterns lit by curiosity and low-volume history. Now, let's ease into tonight's journey. Let the wind soften. Let your muscles settle. And let's walk together into the next part of this strangely calm revolt. The sky doesn't so much brighten as it fades upward. No glorious sunrise here, just a soft gray that forgets to leave. You wake slowly, not from the excitement of revolution, but from the sharp, impolite edge of a root pressing against your spine. Your blanket is damp. Your joints are loud. It takes a moment to remember where you are. A field on the edge of something that might change England or might just ruin your shoes. You sit up and rub your face. Across the rebel camp, fires still crackle, though most have dwindled to smolder. A few men huddle over steaming pots, the scent of weak porridge floating toward the sky with the vague optimism of breakfast. Someone sneezes. Someone else curses. The medieval soundtrack. There's no battle cry, no drums, just the groaning of men who slept in cloaks and damp wool. And somewhere beyond the mist, London waits. You shuffle to your feet, stretch, and begin to walk with the others, down the rutted path leading toward the city walls. Your steps fall in time with dozens of others. Cobblers, tanners, masons, coopers, farmers. It's less of a march and more of a communal sigh with boots. They are tired. They are angry. And they are, somehow, hopeful. Wat Tyler rides at the front. His horse is plain but proud. He's not dressed like a general or a king. No jewels, no armor. Just a sturdy coat, a leather belt, and a voice people listen to. Behind him, makeshift flags wave. Slogans daub hastily in charcoal and wine. No more serfs, equal laws, death to bad advisors. Someone even painted justice for all on a bedsheet. You wonder where they got the sheet. Here's your major historical fact. On June 13th, 1381, the gates of London were opened to the rebels. Voluntarily. Not breached, not broken. Opened. There were sympathizers inside the city, citizens fed up with royal mismanagement, with endless taxes, and with John of Gaunt, the king's uncle who had become a sort of one-man hate magnet. So the people of London simply let the rebels in, a soft invasion. You cross the threshold. London doesn't roar. It blinks. Merchants pull in their carts. Clergy mumble prayers. Housewives peer through cracks in the shutters. The city is resisting. It's watching, waiting. Stone buildings lean gently over narrow streets. The gutters are full of rainwater and other things you choose not to look at. London is a place of contrast. Rotting fish beside silken gloves. Chanting monks beside crooked gamblers. And now, rebels, walking past the shops like they're just in town for market day. Your boots splash through puddles as you pass the Guildhall. It's solid and austere, full of records and silence. A few rebels pause to shout slogans, but there's no looting here. Not yet. The rage is focused, like a poorly aimed arrow still somehow hidden in the right barn. The Savoy Palace is different. Built for John of Gaunt, the palace was one of the grandest residences in England. Marble floors, painted ceilings, tapestries woven with gold thread. It becomes a symbol, a target. The rebels surround it, not with siege weapons, but with fire in their eyes and oil in their hands. They burn it. They don't take the gold. They don't steal the wine. Well, not all of it. They destroy the palace on purpose. A symbolic act. Revenge by architecture. Ironically, one man does try to escape with a goblet of vintage claret. The mob throws him into the flames with the furniture. Brutal? Yes, but consistent. No looting meant no looting. Strange cultural tidbit of the day. Some rebels brought sermons with them. Literally. It's recorded that preachers among the mob would pause to deliver moral instruction in the midst of rioting. Imagine someone setting fire to a nobleman's house while yelling, "Love thy neighbor." Welcome to the cognitive dissonance of medieval revolution. Now you're walking deeper into the city, past the fishmongers, past the Cathedral of St. Paul, just a church then, not yet burned or rebuilt. The rebels fan out. Some shout demands. Others quietly gather bread and broth from sympathetic townsfolk. There's a strange peace to it. No armies clashing. No barricades. Just an uneasy occupation. Like everyone's waiting for the next scene. And then word spreads. The king will meet with the rebels. At Mile End, you pause. Everyone does. It's a strange thing, being acknowledged, not condemned, not attacked, heard. King Richard II is only 14 years old, pale, delicate, with large eyes and an air of distant politeness. He agrees to speak, perhaps to negotiate, perhaps to stall. Historians still debate whether he ever intended to follow through on his promises or even understood them, but he rode out to meet them. That much is certain. At Mile End, the rebels gather in vast numbers, some say tens of thousands. They kneel, they shout, they wait, and the boy king tells them what they want to hear. He promises to abolish serfdom, to issue charters of freedom, to ensure justice for all freemen. His words are light, and the wind carries them, but they land like gold. For now, the crowd is jubilant. Men cheer. Others fall to the ground weeping. It's as if the kingdom has been righted with a few sentences. But it's not over. Remember the Savoy Palace? Its ashes still rise in the distance. That fire has not finished burning. And there are other palaces, other targets. You sit on the edge of a stone fountain, broken and dry. Someone beside you plays a lute very badly. It doesn't matter. The day is full. You chew on a crust of bread, watch the city stir, and wonder if peace is actually possible or just a lull between disappointments. Sleep threatens you again, but not yet. The king has spoken. The rebels have listened. But what Tyler? He hasn't had his say yet. That's for tomorrow. Let's keep walking. You wake the next morning with the sensation that something is wrong. Not dramatically wrong, just subtly misaligned. Like someone's moved your pillow a quarter inch in your sleep. The air is still, oddly so. The camp that had once been filled with boisterous rebels is quiet. And it's not just the hangovers. You stretch under a sky that seems to hesitate. It doesn't quite want to be blue nor gray, but hovers somewhere in the realm of uncommitted cloud. Your limbs ache, not from battle, but from sleeping on what could only be described as grass's angry cousin. You rub your eyes with a fist that still smells like roasted onions and burnt canvas. Then look around. The mood has shifted. Yesterday's near-festival energy, the chanting, the confident speeches, the giddy toppling of the Savoy Palace has deflated, not entirely gone, just quieter. People move slower. Conversations are low. Some have already left, trudging back to Kent and Essex with charters of supposed freedom tucked inside their cloaks like brittle paper promises. But others remain. You remain, because something doesn't sit right. Whispers say the charters aren't being honored, that the king, our softly spoken 14-year-old monarch who promised to abolish serfdom and make every man free, has begun walking back his word. Soon, he had said, soon you'll see the change. The kind of soon that adults say to children when they want them to stop asking questions. What Tyler knows this. He's still here. And today, he's not content with vague smiles and polite nods from the throne. So word spreads like smoke on dry wool. Another meeting. A smaller one. Less theater, more clarity. Tyler demands it. The king agrees. Or rather, the king's advisors agree. Possibly in the way someone agrees to let a cat into the house because it won't stop yowling. The meeting is set for Smithfield, which is one of those charming medieval multi-use spaces. Sometimes a horse market. Sometimes an execution ground. Sometimes a place for noblemen to accidentally agree to unpleasant things. You follow the crowd moving westward. Fewer in number now, but sharper somehow. More alert. The novices and romantics have gone home. What's left are the loyal, the shrewd, and the simply curious. You walk past churches and butcher stalls. The scent of smoked pork mingling with old rain. Smithfield opens before you like a page. Broad, flat, scribbled with foot traffic and tension. What Tyler is already there. Mounted, quiet. No loud rally this time. No chance. He's flanked by a handful of loyal men, one of whom carries a banner that now looks more bedraggled than bold. The words freedom for all sag under the weight of due. Then the king arrives. He's a delicate figure on a tall horse, surrounded by nobles, guards, and the ever-present smell of fear disguised as righteousness. His armor is ceremonial, more silver than steel. His expression unreadable. Tyler steps forward. dismounts, and for a moment, all is still. Then, the moment unravels. Accounts of what happens next vary wildly, depending, of course, on whether they were written by royal scribes, rebellious sympathizers, or monks who enjoyed adding dramatic flair. But most agree on this. Words were exchanged, though no one said what they were. Tyler may have asked for water and was denied. He may have made new demands: free pardon for all rebels, complete end to serfdom, execution of corrupt officials. Or he may have simply spoken too boldly, too casually, for a king unused being challenged by men in homespun. Then it happens. William Walworth, the Lord Mayor of London, steps forward. With the kind of enthusiasm only petty power and political adrenaline can bring, he lashes out. Some say he struck Tyler with a dagger. Others say a sword. Some say it was an overreaction. Most agree it was definitely an overreaction. Tyler staggers. A second blow follows. Guards close in, and in the space of a few heartbeats, the leader of England's largest uprising in centuries is bleeding on the ground. Confused, betrayed, mortal, you're too far to intervene. Most people are. And even if you weren't, what would you do? Throw a shoe at a knight? Scream and be trampled? Instead, you watch in stillness, the way people do when something irreversible is happening and everyone hopes they're just dreaming. And then, something stranger. The king, just a boy, rides forward and declares, loudly and with disturbing poise, "I am your leader now. I am your captain." His voice doesn't crack. His hands don't shake. The crowd, stunned by what they witnessed, kneels, or stares, or runs. But no one dares raise a weapon. Not now. You remain still. Your pitchfork, more decorative than useful, is suddenly very, very heavy. The king continues speaking. Reassurances, promises, proclamations. A smooth coat of words over a very jagged deed. Nearby, Tyler is carried to a nearby hospital. Some say he died there. Others say he was dragged out and publicly beheaded. Either way, his story ends, not with victory, but with a cut throat and a head on a spike. Your major historical fact. What Tyler was killed at Smithfield on June 15th, 1381, in what many believe was a betrayal masked as negotiation. It marked the symbolic death of the revolt. From there, the unraveling began in earnest. Strange cultural tidbit? According to several 15th century chroniclers, Tyler's death was followed by a peculiar silence that lasted hours. Not a riot, not chaos, just stillness, as if no one wanted to be the next mistake. Some said it was because the king had the divine aura of kingship. Others said it was because most rebels had already booked return passage to their villages and were tired of missing lunch. Historians still debate whether this moment was planned by the crown, whether Tyler's death was a trap or a spontaneous act of aristocratic panic. The truth is buried beneath too many biased scrolls and far too many Latin footnotes. You look around. The rebels are leaving now. Not running, not weeping, just walking away. Like guests leaving a party that didn't so much as dissolve. Smithfield is still. You walk, too, one foot after the other, through the same streets you entered just days before, full of hope, fire, and cabbage breath. The revolution, like the Savoy Palace, has burned out, but you're not empty. Not quite. Something lingers. Let's walk together a little longer. The road is still warm with footprints. The city exhales, not in relief, but in that heavy, resigned way someone might sigh when they realize they've just spilled wine on a borrowed manuscript. You walk slowly, almost cautiously, down the same streets you once marched through with confidence. Only now, the banners are gone. The songs have stopped. The doors that had opened wide for you days ago are shut again. Quietly, discreetly, but with unmistakable finality, the rebellion, as it turns out, ends not with a cry but with a mutter. The news spreads quickly. What Tyler is dead. Beheaded. His head now sits on a spike above London Bridge. His mouth still slightly open, as though trying to finish his last sentence. It's hard to look at. Harder to look away. You pass under the bridge on your way to the riverfront. Try not to glance upward, but your eyes betray you. There it is, the reality of power. Cold iron and splinters and silence. A king who shakes your hand with one and sharpens a knife with the other. The Thames drifts past in its usual muddy indifference. Barges come and go. A washerwoman scrubs clothes on a slanted stone. A child tosses pebbles with the seriousness of a man at war. Life resumes, not because anything is resolved, but because people have no choice. You find a quiet spot behind a broken fence and sit. Your hands are raw from rope work. Your feet ache. Your spirit feels murky. You think back to the chance. When Adam delved and Eve span, who was then the gentleman? You think of the sermons, the bonfires, the hope. You remember a man who said the world could change if enough people simply walked in the same direction. And now your pockets are empty again. Your shoes are wetter than ever. And the royal heralds are already announcing that all charters granted during the revolt are null and void. Every promise erased with a flick of ink and a tilt of the king's head. The dream of freedom dissolves like flour in dirty broth. Here's your historical fact for tonight. Following Tyler's death, King Richard II rescinded every concession made to the rebels. He promised liberty on one day and revolted the next, proving that in medieval politics, time was elastic and so were morals. In the days that followed, dozens of rebel leaders were executed without trial. John Ball, the fiery preacher whose sermons had stoked the flame of rebellion, was hanged, drawn, and quartered, but not before telling the crowd, "Now is time to beware." Some listened. Most went home. You still haven't decided. Weird cultural tidbit? In the months following the revolt, many nobles quietly increased local tithes under the pretense of restoring order. One town even taxed its own residents to pay for a new set of gallows, a sort of civic warning sign carved in wood. Imagine being charged for your own threat. You walk again, this time toward the city's edge. A light mist falls, one of those English rains that never actually drops, just lingers. It kisses your cloak and curls into your hood. Even the mud feels reluctant to squish. You pass a tavern where, just days earlier, men had clinked cups and declared a New England. Tonight, the windows are shuttered, and only a sliver of light slips through the cracks. A sign on the door reads, "Closed for private gathering," which, in this context, is a polite way of saying we're pretending nothing happened. You lean against a stone wall beside a stack of empty barrels and listen. A church bell rings the hour. Someone coughs. A cat slips by with more grace than you'll ever have. The revolution may have failed, but the world keeps moving, mostly because it doesn't know how to stop. Historians still debate whether the Peasants' Revolt achieved anything at all. On paper, it was a disaster. No laws changed. No feudal chains were broken. But in the long shadows of the years that followed, the serfdom system slowly began to erode. Not loudly, not quickly, but undeniably. Landowners, fearing future uprisings, began offering wages to keep workers. The labor force, once bound, started a bargain. Quiet progress in the guise of surrender. You don't know this yet. Of course. You only feel the weight of now. The flicker of something lost. The dull ache of hope when it goes too long without being fed. A man walks by carrying a sack of potatoes and says nothing. You nod. He nods. This is how grief travels in public. In silent recognition, and eye contact held just a second longer than necessary. You turn one last time toward the heart of London. The tower, the palace, the bridge. Then you shift your eyes to the road heading east, toward Kent. Home, or whatever waits there. You're not defeated. Not really. Just changed. Just quieter. Just one more person in a long line of people who tried. And that, perhaps, is enough for now. Let's keep walking. There's still more story ahead. You leave London as if walking away from a stage play that ended mid-scene. The actors are gone, the torches are out, and the audience has quietly decided not to talk about what they saw. The road east is softer than you remember. It curls past hedgerows and pastures, the earth muddied from a recent rain. The carts leave shallow ruts, and your boots sink just slightly with each step, like the ground is reluctant to let you go. You don't blame it. You're not sure where you're headed anymore. Around you, others walk too. Former rebels, though no one calls themselves that aloud. You're just travelers now. Farmers again. Bakers. Masons, you're returning to the roles you had before you marched to the city, thinking you might become more than a name on a tax roll. You pass a man who was at Mile End, the one who shouted justice for the poor, so loudly he nearly fainted. Today, he carries a sack of turnips and avoids eye contact. You nod. He nods back. That's all anyone has the energy for now. It's quiet, this walk. Too quiet, maybe. You start to miss the drums that were always slightly offbeat, the shouted slogans that rarely rhymed. You even miss the self-declared camp cook who insisted on putting dried nettles in everything. His stew tasted like betrayal and regret, but at least it was warm. Now, you chew on cold bread that flakes like dry parchment and try not to remember the taste of promises. After a few miles, you come to a clearing where someone has built a small fire. A group has gathered. You join them, sit without speaking, and warm your hands. The fire crackles softly. One man tries to tell a joke about a monk, a barrel of ale, and a dishonest pig, but no one laughs. Not because it isn't funny, just because no one feels like laughing today. Here's your major historical fact. In the days following Wat Tyler's death and the symbolic submission of the rebels to King Richard II, a wave of retribution swept across southern England. Royal commissions were dispatched to identify and punish those who had acted against the crown. Within weeks, dozens of executions took place in places like Norwich, Bury St. Edmunds, and St. Albans. Some were leaders. Some were simply the loudest voices in the crowd. Some weren't even sure why they were arrested. But punishment needed to be seen. That was the point. And the people who had clapped for those hanged men a week earlier now wept as they watched them die. Grief is never more bitter than when it tastes like guilt. As you sit by the fire, one man wonders aloud, if it's treason to demand bread, what we call the hunger, no one answers. You rise the next morning to the sound of crows and boots on wet grass. The group has already begun to disperse. No goodbyes, just small nods, half smiles, and people turning down different paths. You turn, too, eastward, toward Kent. The hills undulate before you like an old blanket rumpled with memory. You pass a copse of trees that look familiar. You think back. Was this where you camped on your first night out of the village? The fire here was bigger then. The voices louder. The air full of that strange, electric sense that history was about to pivot under your feet. Now it just smells like moss. Along the road, you meet a shepherd boy who recognizes you. He stares for a moment, then offers a half-eaten apple. You thank him. It's crisp, sweet, and slightly bruised, like everything else in your life right now. You ask him if anything's changed since the revolt. He shrugs. Father says we'll still pay, just not all at once. Progress, apparently, comes in fractions. As you continue, you stop at a village to rest. A small place, no church tower, just a collection of stone cottages hunched together like they're whispering secrets. You knock on a door. A woman answers. She eyes your worn cloak and road-dusted boots, then gestures you in. No questions, just soup and silence. Later, over a wooden bowl of broth, so thin it might be a suggestion rather than a meal, she asks if you saw the king. You nod. She asks if he looked kind. You pause. You say, he looked like someone trying to believe his own words. She nods like she understands. Maybe she does. Here's your weird cultural tidbit. In some English villages, particularly in Kent and Suffolk, there was a curious tradition in the months following the revolt. People would carve small wooden birds, usually wrens or crows, and hang them above their doorways. Quiet symbols of watching. Not rebellion exactly, but remembrance. A way of saying we know what was done and we will not forget. Some of those carvings survive, tucked in museum drawers and attics. Most are gone, but stories say that the people who kept them lived differently, held their heads just a little higher, refused, sometimes, to bow when the steward passed by. Small things. But then, revolutions are made of small things. You reach a ridge just before sunset and stop. Below you lies the valley where your village sits. A small cluster of rooftops nestled between slow-moving fields. It looks the same, exactly the same. The trees haven't shifted. The well still gleams. Smoke curls from a chimney you know by heart. And yet, something is different. Because you are. Historians still debate what changed most after 1381. Some argue that the revolt failed utterly, that the crown reasserted total control, that all gains were illusion. Others see it as the beginning of the end for serfdom in England, a psychological shift, a moment when the people learned they could speak, even if they were silenced afterward. But no one debates this. The memory of 1381 lived on, in songs, in rumors, in warnings whispered to grandchildren, and in the shape of a man returning home with sore feet and a fire in his chest that even betrayal couldn't quite put out. You stand for a long time on that ridge. The sky burns orange at the edges. A single crow circles overhead. Then you take a breath and descend, not as a soldier, not even as a rebel, just as someone who saw the machine of power from the inside and chose to walk away still human. Let's walk with you just a little further. The road bends again, and behind that bend, memory, sorrow, and supper. You reach your village just after dusk, though calling it a village might be a bit generous. It's a handful of homes clustered around a stone well and an aging pear tree that still insists on dropping unripe fruit onto people's heads every September. You know each roof, each doorway, each path worn into the earth by hooves and habit. And yet tonight, it all feels like a place you used to live, before history cracked open and swallowed you whole for a while. Children peer from behind shutters. A dog barks once, then remembers it's you and slinks back into the dark. You pass the baker's house, still standing, still carrying that faint aroma of warm crust, yeast, and gossip. Your old neighbor, Ellsworth, stands outside with her arms folded. She doesn't smile, but she doesn't look away either. That's her way of saying hello. No one cheers. No one asks for stories. They just let you pass in peace. The fire in your cottage is long gone cold, and your tools are still where you left them, dustier but intact. You sit on the edge of your bed, which sags like it missed you, but won't admit it, and look around the dim room. There's a wooden cup with the chip you never fixed. The woven mat you always meant to throw out. The ceiling beam that creaks when the wind scolded too harshly. You're home, and you're not the same. You lie back and stare at the thatched ceiling while crickets sing their sleepy chorus outside. In the days that follow, life resumes its rhythm, more or less. You rise with the sun, just as you did before. You mend fences. You trim hedges. You trade labor for eggs. No one mentions London. No one says revolt. But when you look certain people in the eye, folks who also disappeared for a few days, came back with thicker silence and slightly straighter posture. You know they were there, and they know you were too. Here's your major historical fact. Despite its failure in immediate political goals, the Peasants' Revolt of 1381 left a long shadow over English law and labor. In the decades that followed, though the monarchy remained intact and serfdom was not officially abolished, the system began to decay. By the early 1400s, many lords stopped enforcing feudal duties. The labor shortage, worsened by the Black Death and ongoing economic shifts, made free workers more valuable than bound ones. So even though no decree declared the peasants victorious, the land quietly began to bend in their favor. The kingdom did not say, "You were right." It said, "Let's never speak of this again," which, in England, is more or less the same thing. Meanwhile, in your village, new rules sprout like weeds. The steward now posts notices on a church door, written in Latin no one reads, and sealed with wax that smells of arrogance. The taxes are still there, altered, renamed, but persistent. The difference is in the tone. Before they felt like iron. Now they feel like clay, bendable, disputable. And when no one responds to the new poll tax, no one is dragged from their home. At least not yet. You see small acts of quiet rebellion. Men speaking more boldly at the market. Women trading goods without the Lord's tithe. A younger boy, just 15, openly mocking the constable. Years ago, that would have earned him a slap. Now it earns him a laugh. Change, it seems, comes not like a thunderclap, but like moss creeping over stone. You remember one night, about a week after returning, when you sat with 3 others around a low fire. No one said much, until one of them, Martin, a mason whose hands were always stained with dust, spoke up. "You think they'll try again?" he asked. "Who?" someone replied. "Us," he said. "Not now. Maybe not for years. But again." You had no answer then. You still don't. Your strange cultural tidbit. In years following the revolt, some villages held what were known as shadow wakes. These were not funerals exactly, but nighttime gatherings where people shared bread and stories in honor of the executed rebels. They took place quietly, sometimes in fields, sometimes near trees with names like Tyler's Oak or Ball's Hollow. Songs were whispered, names were passed down, even when erased from the scrolls of lord and clerics. The stories found their way into seed and soil. Some of those trees still stand. You pass one each day on your walk to the river. You didn't notice it much before, but now its shape feels familiar, like something waiting, watching. Historians still debate whether the revolt inspired the later rise of English individual rights, or if it was merely a tragic footnote. Some argue it was a spark that never caught. Others see it as the match that eventually led to the fire of reform centuries later. But there is no doubt that it changed the way rulers viewed the ruled. For the first time, the peasants had spoken not just with pitchforks, but with ideas. And those ideas, once voiced, don't die easily. You live simply now, carefully. You don't talk much about the city. Not because of fear exactly, but because it feels like something sacred. You've seen the world's throat. You've seen how soft the skin is, even beneath gold. One morning, while repairing a fence post, you find something tucked into a knot of wood, a small, carved crow. No note, no name, just a shape, watching. You hang it above your doorway. No one asks what it means. They already know. Let's walk a little further, just beyond the hill. The story is fading, but not yet finished. The summer rolls forward, but it forgets to bring warmth. The days are long, yes, but cool. The kind of cool that settles in your shirt and clings to your collarbone like a gentle warning. The fields swell with green, but they don't quite sing. It's as if the land itself is holding its breath. You wake with the sun, as always, to the sound of the cockerel who believes volume is character. Your hands reach instinctively for the same wooden cup, the same patched tunic. But your thoughts, they're no longer small. Before London, you'd think about weather and wheat, oxen and eggs. Now, somewhere between scraping the dirt from your boots and checking on the goats, you wonder about law, about who decides, about what makes a king, and why a promise vanishes when it's written on parchment held by a child. You're not the only one. The change is subtle, but there. The villager speaks softer in public, louder in private. In hushed corners, old men begin stories with "back in June" and end them with a pause. Children mimic marches when they think no one's looking. Even the steward, once smug and certain, rides his horse with less fanfare, like someone who's tasted the edge of a crowd's patience. There's no revolt, nothing so grand, but something is simmering, and you can feel it. Today, you walk to the market in the neighboring village, a larger one, 3 miles down the path past the crooked elm and the sheep that judges everyone. You carry a bundle of turnips and some threadbare apples, hoping to trade for salt and vinegar. The road is quiet at first. Then you hear footsteps behind you. 2 men, then 3. You recognize one, Thomas, a thatcher who always swore at his own roof. He nods. Going to the market? You nod back. You end up walking together, talking in short bursts. Not about London, not directly, but around it. The price of flour, the steward's new tax, the sudden appearance of royal officials in towns that used to be left alone. Thomas eventually says, "We might have lost, but they remember us now." You chew that sentence like bread too dry to swallow. Here's your major historical fact. Following the revolt, King Richard II toured several counties personally, not just to assert control, but to reassure the gentry that he could contain the lower orders. It was a performance, a royal pageant of firmness and forgiveness. In some towns, he issued pardons. In others, executions. He was building an image, the boy king who faced a dragon and lived. And behind that smile was a message meant for people like you. Don't try again. But people like you are listening differently now. At the market, there's tension. Subtle but palpable. A group of soldiers, 5 of them, stand near the stocks, pretending not to watch. They don't carry swords openly, but you see the hilts under their cloaks. You trade your turnips for salt, but the merchant barely looks you in the eye. Then you see the gallows, new, unused, not even stained yet. But it's there, a message in wood and rope. You don't say anything. You don't need to. Everyone saw it. Everyone pretends not to. You start your walk back before midday, bag heavier than expected, thoughts heavier still. You take the long path through the woods, just in case. Not because you're afraid, but because quiet has become your favorite companion. Halfway through, you stop at a stone. It's one of the old druidic ones, weathered and half swallowed by moss. No one knows why it's here. Some say it marks a burial. Others say it's a boundary. You sit beside it and pull out a hunk of bread, chewing slowly, watching birds rearrange themselves in the trees. They're carved faintly into the side of the stone. You see something new, a crow, etched in careful strokes. Beneath it, a circle. You run your fingers over the shape, like a priest reading a silent prayer. Your strange cultural tidbit. In some areas of England after 1381, traveling beggars and minstrels began carrying coded symbols, carved into wood or etched onto spoons. A crow with a circle meant, I saw the fire and remember. A hand meant, I marched. A tree meant safe house. These marks weren't part of any organized resistance, but they were signs, proof that memory was alive and memory traveled. As you rise and continue down the path, you start looking for more marks. A fence post, a tree trunk, a stone by a well, and now you begin to see them everywhere. Not obvious, not loud, but they're there. Historians still debate whether this network of signs was deliberate or spontaneous. Some claim it was merely folk art, coincidence. Others believe it was the beginning of what we now call a political consciousness. People realizing they shared more than just poverty. They share history, vision, loss. You return home at dusk. A neighbor asks if the salt was expensive. You say no. They nod. Then they whisper, there's one on the barn. You follow them around the side of your home. They're near the base, scratched lightly into the wood. Another crow. No circle this time. Just a bird. Facing east. You don't erase it. You go inside and light a candle. And that night, for the first time since London, you dream of fire, not as destruction, but as warmth, as signal, as something that waits. Let's stay in this quiet for a while. But only a while. There's more yet to come. The harvest comes late that year, as if even the wheat is reluctant to be gathered. The wind has changed. It's not louder, just heavier, carrying the scent of drying leaves, burning straw, and the kind of silence that settles when people learn not to say what they're thinking. You bend over in the fields like you've always done, hands working the sickle, breath in time with the soil. But every so often, you glance at the ridge above the village. There where a single twisted oak leans defiantly into the wind. Someone has tied a piece of black cloth. It wasn't you. It wasn't your neighbor. No one admits to it. But it's always there. Sometimes replaced, sometimes left fluttering, torn, and fading. A mark, a memory. You work, you eat, you sleep. But beneath it all, something has settled inside you, like a coal in the center of your chest. Not rage, not yet, just warmth. Waiting. One morning, a traveler arrives. He's lean with a limp and carries a lute he hasn't tuned in years. He trades news for food. At first, the usual stories, whether in Sussex, bandits near Winchester, a fox that walked into a church and sat on the altar. But then, over a bowl of barley stew, he leans in and says it. They're stirring again, in Suffolk and up north. No one responds. So he adds, they say it's not about taxes this time. It's about rights. You finish your stew. You say nothing. Later, as you walk into the edge of the village, he asks if you'd like to hear a psalm. You shrug. He plays a tune that's slow and low, with no real melody, just a rhythm, like footsteps. The words are simple. They promised us the land was free, but took it back by dawn. Now every crow that watches me remembers what went wrong. You don't clap. He doesn't bow. He just keeps walking. You return home and sit on the stone by the well. You watch the sky, pale at the edges, like it forgot how to be blue. Somewhere nearby, a dog barks, and a woman scolds it for thinking too much of itself. Here's your major historical fact. Although the Peasants' Revolt of 1381 was crushed, the memory of it lingered powerfully in English folklore and ballads for centuries. In the 15th century, stories about what Tyler, Jack Straw, and John Ball were passed down orally, sometimes reimagined as tragic heroes, sometimes as saints. In parts of Kent and Essex, people would gather in secret to tell the tale on midsummer nights, quietly by firelight, as if the flames themselves might judge the telling. The ruling class knew this, knew the story was still alive, and they feared it, so they tried to write their own. In 1382, Parliament passed the Treason Act, broadening the definition of rebellion to include speech and incitement. New laws banned false ballads, and in some towns, wandering minstrels had to register with local constables. One was imprisoned for singing a tune that compared the king to a rooster who crowed but never fought. Fear, it seemed, had found a rhythm. Still, the story survived, folded into riddles, hidden in songs, etched in wooden spoons passed down as heirlooms. Here's your weird cultural tidbit. In the decade that followed, some households began placing small bundles of herbs, thyme, rue, and wormwood above their doorframes during certain feasts. Publicly, it was said to ward off illness. Privately, it was a symbol of remembrance. Thyme for courage, rue for regret, wormwood for bitterness. If you knew, you knew. You remember your mother used to do the same. You thought it was just superstition. Now you wonder. That night, you light a candle and sit with a piece of wood in your lap. You carve slowly, carefully, not with skill but with certainty. A circle, a crow, a single leaf beneath it. You hang it above your door. No one asks. No one needs to. Historians still debate whether the 1381 revolt should be seen as a failure or a spark. Some frame it as a cautionary tale. Others see it as the beginning of England's long, stubborn journey towards self-governance. The truth is probably both, a caution and a beginning, a warning and a seed. You walk the fields the next day and see someone else's mark scratched into a fence, a tree, a cart. You don't know who made them. Maybe no one does. But you feel suddenly less alone, and that changes everything. You walk to the hill with a black cloth and sit beneath the oak. The wind moves through the leaves with a whisper that could almost be words. You close your eyes and listen. For the first time in weeks, you smile, just a little. But it's real. Let's rest here for a moment. Let the wind speak. Let the trees remember. There's still more to tell. You spend more time on the hill now, not to escape. Exactly. But because something in the way the oak leans into the wind feels honest. It doesn't flinch, doesn't perform. It simply stands, scarred, weathered, and still very much alive. Each morning, after your work is done, you walk the same path, boots brushing the tall grass that whispers its own old stories. Sometimes you bring a bit of bread, sometimes nothing, but you always bring silence, the kind that listens. The cloth tied to the branch above has frayed further, barely more than threads now, but no one removes it. No one dares. You're not the only visitor. One day, you find a small stone at the base of the tree, painted with ochre and ash in the shape of a handprint. Another day, a scrap of linen tucked into a knot of bark. On it, someone's written a line. The king promised. That's it. Nothing else. But it's enough. Back in the village, life performs its usual play. Plowing, mending, trading. Children chase chickens. Women sing while weaving, and the steward visits twice a week now instead of once. Each time he does, he eyes you, not suspiciously, but thoughtfully, as if he's trying to place you in a ledger where you no longer quite belong. At the market, you overhear a conversation between two merchants. One is complaining about a group of laborers in Oxfordshire who refuse a harvest unless their lord doubled their bread allowance. The other scoffs, but then leans in and mutters, "Well, I don't blame them. People are still polite, still cautious, but you can feel it. The kingdom cracked this summer. It was patched over, yes, But the crack remains. Here's your major historical fact. The decades following the peasants' revolt saw the slow but steady rise of the wage labor in England. Lords, facing the combined aftermath of the Black Death and repeated unrest, found it harder to enforce traditional feudal obligations. The Statute of Laborers, which once tried to fix wages and bind workers to land, became increasingly difficult to enforce. By the 1400s, the practice of paying agricultural laborers a daily wage had become more common than customary dues. The system hadn't collapsed. It had adapted. You return home one evening to find a bundle on your doorstep. It contains bread and apple and a piece of cardwood in the shape of a boot, a mark of solidarity. In this language of hidden symbols, a boot means I walk too. You place it on your shelf beside the crow. A few days later, a young man from the next village arrives. He says he's looking for work, but he doesn't ask many questions about wages. What he wants to know is if you were in London, if you saw what Tyler, if it's true what they say, that he stood upright, even as he bled. You nod. He smiles and says he thought so. You let him stay in the barn. Your strange cultural tidbit for today. In some villages, particularly in parts of Kent, it became common in the late 14th century to name children born after 1381, with subtle nods to the rebellion. Names like Tyler, Ball, and even Straw began to appear in church records, not as surnames, but first names. A quiet act of defiance, a seed of memory. One chronicler grumbled in Latin that the rabble now named their sons after devils and bakers, which probably says more about the chronicler than the children. At night, the young man from the barn, his name is Eli, tells you what he's heard on the road. He says in Norwich, a blacksmith refused to pay the salt tax and was let go after a crowd gathered around him. No violence, no threats, just presence. He says in York, a scribe was caught copying John Ball's sermons and was whipped, but someone helped him escape. He says in Lincolnshire, no one has seen the steward in over a month. None of these are confirmed. They're stories, but they're moving. You sit on the step together, under a sky that looks bruised but peaceful. The stars blink slowly into place. One falls, briefly. Eli says, it's not over. You ask, what isn't? He shrugs. The waking. Historians still debate whether the post-revolt quiet was strategic or fearful. Did the people truly go back to sleep? Or were they simply waiting for the next moment? Some believe the movement had no structure, no memory. Others argue that it grew into whispers, into customs, into what some later call the English spirit. Hard to define, impossible to erase. You don't know if you'll rise again, or march again, or if your boots will ever leave this village. But you do know one thing. You'll remember, and you'll help others remember too. That maybe is enough. The oak tree waits. The cloth flutters. The marks remain. So does the road. Let's stay here a while longer. But be ready. Stories have long legs. And sometimes they turn back toward the city. Autumn leans in. The leaves have begun to slip from the trees. Not fall exactly, but let go, as if even they are tired of holding on. The wind carries a new edge now. Not sharp enough to cut, but enough to remind you that warmth is borrowed, not owned. You wake to mist, not the light, whimsical kind poets adore, but the kind that clings to your skin and follows you between fence posts. The ground softens underfoot. The animals grow quiet. The rhythm of the village slows, like a heart settling after a sprint. And yet, beneath the fog, something stirs. Eli, the young traveler, is still in the barn. He's taken to helping with chores, splitting wood, mending tools, fetching water from the well when your knees protest. He whistles while he works, but never the same tune twice. You begin to suspect he carries more songs than bread. One morning, he shows you a folded piece of cloth, tucked deep in his pack, black, with a red thread stitched in a loose spiral. It's from Colchester, he says quietly. They're writing things down now, keeping track. Who marched, who fed rebels, who turned away royal officers. You raise an eyebrow. Isn't that dangerous? He nods. Yes, that's how you know it matters. You say nothing. but you look at the cloth longer than you meant to. Here's your major historical fact. In the wake of the revolt, written accounts of the uprising were tightly controlled by clerical authorities and royal scribes. But in secret, rebel sympathizers began creating field scrolls, simple ledgers that recorded names, dates, and towns involved. Many were hidden in barns, under floorboards, or sewn into clothing. Very few survive today, but enough remain to prove they existed, and that the people, once called voiceless, were quietly keeping their own records. You ask Eli who started it. Some say a monk, others say a midwife in camp. Could be both. He grins. Could be neither. At the village, well, you notice two boys try and carve something into the stone. When they see you watching, they run, but not before you see it. A small crow, wings tucked. The lines are sloppy, but the intent is clear. You don't stop them. That afternoon, you travel to the next hamlet for flour. The sky is a quilt of gray and yellow, stitched badly at the seams. On the road, you pass a merchant cart carrying bolts of wool, and the loudest goose you've ever heard. It honks at you like it knows your sins. The hamlet is smaller than yours, but more alert. People look up when you arrive. Some smile. One man touches the brim of his cap and says, "You were in London, weren't you?" You pause. "I was." He nods once and doesn't press. At the baker's, while trading 2 eggs and a strip of linen for a measure of flour, the baker leans in. "They say there's a gathering near Maidstone next month," she whispers. "Not another march. Just stories. Passing things down, you know?" You nod slowly. She adds, "They've stopped calling it revolt. They're calling it the first remembering." Your strange cultural tidbit. In several regions of England, particularly Kent, Norfolk, and Essex, annual gatherings quietly emerged in the decades following the Peasants' Revolt. They were disguised as festivals, harvest blessings, or saints' days, but their real purpose was memory. Folk plays would reenact parts of the uprising, often with symbolic animals instead of named characters. A fox in fine robes, a lamb who speaks truth, a boy who drops a crown into a well. Children would be taught a rhyme. What's burned is never buried. What's quiet still is said. When crows are in the barley, the fire isn't dead. These gatherings weren't loud. They weren't confrontational, but they kept the spark glowing year after year. You carry your flour home in silence, your head full of quiet phrases and children's rhymes. Along the path, you pause at the twisted oak. Someone's left a clay figurine at the base. It's crude. A man, standing upright, hand raised. You don't need to ask who it's meant to be. You sit. You watch the wind play with the ragged threads of the old black cloth. Historians still debate the accuracy of peasant memory. The official records of 1381 are full of contradictions, omissions, and erasures. But the oral histories, the stories passed from grandmother to child, from plowman to apprentice, preserve names and moments that the crown tried to forget. And over time, some of those oral stories found their way into written ballads, legal challenges, even parliamentary speeches. It's said that when a member of parliament first cited Wat Tyler in a speech in the early 1600s, the chamber went still for several seconds. Even silence, it seems, can echo. You walk home slowly. Eli is sitting on the step, whittling something small from a bit of oak. "What is it?" You ask. He shrugs. Maybe a spoon, maybe a sign. You sit beside him. The sky darkens. Smoke rises from chimneys. A goat sneezes. The world turns. And beneath it, the story waits. Not dead, not gone, just breathing. Let's stay here a little longer. The fire is low, but still alive. Winter doesn't announce itself. It just arrives one morning. The frost holds longer on the fields. The chickens are slower to stir, and the breath you exhale is visible for the first time in weeks. It's not cruel yet, but it taps at the bones, whispers at the joints. A gentle reminder that comfort is seasonal. You patch the leaks in the cottage roof with mud and straw. You mend your cloak. You curse your boots, which have taken on the personality of a tired mule. Loud, heavy, and perpetually damp. Eli helps chop wood, his swing still clumsy but determined. The two of you spend most evenings sitting by the hearth, staring at flames like they might whisper secrets. One night, As the wind scratches against the shutters and the stew bubbles like it's trying to escape its own flavor, Eli asks a question. Do you think we lost? You chew slowly, not because the food demands it. Turnips and thyme don't take much effort, but because words are harder now than they used to be. No, you say at last. Not all of it. He nods, but doesn't look satisfied. Here's your major historical fact. In the winter after the revolt, royal justices rode from town to town, enforcing what they called cleansing acts. These were judicial inquiries meant to root out rebels, sympathizers, and even those who had failed to report rebellious speech. Many ordinary villagers were fined, imprisoned, or forced to swear oaths of loyalty under the eye of the crown. The result wasn't just punishment. It was public humiliation. Loyalty was no longer assumed. It had to be proven. In some villages, men were made to kiss the Lord's seal in front of their neighbors. A grown man bent over wax and paper, pretending it was sacred. But not everywhere. In your part of Kent, the officials arrived once, asked a few questions, took note of a few names. Then they left. You suspect they sensed something here, an unease not worth stirring, a silence too thick to wade through. The village survives a winter like it always does, by turning inward. Windows shuttered, doors closed, meals quiet, but the oak still stands, and people still visit it, always alone, always briefly. You notice new offerings, a piece of charcoal, a twist of red string, a seed pod. You and Eli begin carving, not openly, not for trade, but for others like you. Small tokens, crows, circles, open palms. You leave them behind in quiet places, fence posts, tree hollows near wells. Sometimes you see one hanging near a stranger's cottage. Sometimes it's gone by morning, your strange cultural tidbit. In some corners of England, particularly along the eastern coast, a tradition emerged in winter festivals of hanging carved symbols, what villagers called remembrance knots, in the eaves of homes. The church called them charms. The lords called them idolatry, but the people said little. The designs varied, but a common one was a bundle of lines that resembled a bird's footprint. Supposedly it meant, we were there, we are still here. You don't hang one from your roof, but you carve one into your table, just a little one, near the edge where your cup rests each morning. And you notice your hand lingers there, more often than it used to. One cold morning, a letter arrives. Not official, no seal, no horseman, just parchment, hand-delivered by a girl who smiles but doesn't speak. You unfold it carefully. It's a list of names. You know a few, some from London, some from the path you walked. At the bottom, a line in smaller handwriting. Still breathing, still listening, still more of us than they think. Eli reads it over your shoulder and says nothing for a long time. Then he says, we should send something back. You nod. Historians still debate whether communication between former rebels continued after the revolt's collapse. Most official records suggest not, but private letters, hidden carvings, and surviving scrolls tell a different story. A slow, careful exchange of symbols and names that lasted years. Some scholars call it a resistance network. Others call it a myth. But myths, often leave footprints. You write a reply. You don't sign your name. Just a phrase. Let the snow fall. Roots grow in silence. You give the letter to a tinker who says he's headed toward Rochester. He doesn't ask what's inside. He doesn't need to. That night, you and Eli sit beside the fire in comfortable silence. Then he says, if they called another meeting, would you go? You look at the fire. You think about the cold, the fear, the memories. Then you say, yes. Quietly, but yes. The wind rattles the shutters again. The crow on your shelf leans ever so slightly toward the flame. Let's rest here for tonight. The snow hasn't come yet, but something is building. The first snow falls overnight, soft and slow, like ash from a memory you haven't spoken of in months. You wake to a world remade in pale silence. The paths are gone, swallowed under white. Footprints appear, then vanish, filled in by the morning wind. The oak on the hill now wears a crown of frost, every branch outlined in silver. You stand at your doorway, cloak wrapped tightly, and breathe in the quiet. It smells like wood smoke, old iron, and something else you can't name. Something colder than snow, older than frost. The village stirs, but barely. Smoke curls from chimneys. A rooster crows late, with the embarrassed energy of someone who overslept and is trying to act normal. You make a small fire, heat water, break bread. Eli appears in the barn with snow in his hair, and a grin too wide for the weather. He shakes off like a dog and says, "There's a mark on the hill." You look up from your cup. "A new one?" you ask. He nods. Together, you walk the hill, boots crunching softly. The snow here is untouched, save for a path of prints leading to the oak. At the base, someone has left a circle of stones, each painted with a different symbol: a crow, a boot, a flame, an open hand, a broken chain. In the center, a small wooden disc carved with words. "We are ready." You both stare at it for a while. Neither of you speak. Here's your major historical fact. By the early 1390s, organized resistance among peasants in England had shifted from open rebellion to covert cooperation. Across the southeast, small, informal guilds began forming, not of merchants or craftsmen, but of workers who swore silent oaths to help one another against unjust fines, taxes, or feudal demands. They met under the guise of sharing tools, discussing crop rotations, or holding prayer meetings. But their real power was mutual defense. They didn't call themselves rebels. They called themselves neighbors. You walk back to the village with new eyes. There's the smith, hammering slower than usual. His apprentice wears a belt with a crow stitched into the leather. There's Agnes, the widow who never speaks to anyone, placing a twist of red yarn on her doorstep, like it's just fallen there. There's the steward's house. Windows dark, shutters closed, the man himself away on business. The village breathes differently now, like it's holding something beneath its ribs. That afternoon, a rider arrives. He's not royal, not official, just another traveler on a muddied horse with road dust on his teeth. He stops in the square, dismounts stiffly, and pulls out a scroll. No proclamation, no speech, just a question. Who here remembers 1381? No one answers aloud, but no one walks away either. After a moment, he nods and says, "There's a gathering near Canterbury, midwinter. No banners, no speeches, just listening. Stories, quiet voices. If you want to come, come. If not, stay warm." But the fire's being built again. He leaves before sunset. You and Eli say nothing, but you both pack a small bag that night, just in case. Your strange cultural tidbit. It said that during the cold winters of the late 14th century, peasants began baking ghost loaves, small undercooked pieces of bread left on windowsills or gates, not be eaten, but to honor the dead of 1381. These were shaped like feet, hands, or masks. Superstition claimed the wind would carry their scent to the spirits of the fallen, letting them know they were remembered. Some clerics denounced it as pagan nonsense. Others quietly baked their own. You've never made one before, but tonight, you do. You use barley, water, and a pinch of salt. You shape it roughly. Let it burn just slightly at the edges. You place it on your windowsill. And in the quiet, before sleep comes, you think you see a shape in the snow. A crow, just sitting, watching. Historians still debate whether these gatherings, these midwinter meetings, these guilds of memory, actually influence political change, or merely preserve dignity. No records list them. No royal decrees name them, but the pattern is unmistakable. In the decade that followed, England's rural poor became harder to govern and quicker to speak. A new kind of English subject was born, not yet free, but never truly silent again. You wake before dawn, sling your bag over your shoulder, and step into the cold. Eli meets you at the gate. Neither of you says where you're going. You just start walking. The path is long. The snow is deep, but your steps are steady. Let's follow you for a while. The wind carries stories farther than maps, and it knows the way. The road to Canterbury is quieter than expected. Not deserted, no, but sparse. The kind of path where you can go an hour hearing nothing but your own boots and the occasional crow commenting on your posture. Snow crunches beneath you with the soft resistance of packed earth and memory. The trees hang low, their limbs bare but expressive, as if they too are gesturing towards something beyond the horizon. Eli walks ahead of you, humming a tune with no name. You recognize the rhythm. It's the same one a mother once sang to calm a fussy baby after a thunderstorm. Strange, how the songs travel faster than horses. You pass 3 travelers near a narrow bridge. They nod. You nod. None of you stop. But you all know it takes 2 days. Maybe 3. The cold blurs time. You sleep in a hayloft one night. A hollowed-out barn the next. At each stop, someone offers you something. A piece of salted meat. A spot near the fire. A story about a cousin who once saw what Tyler and lived to remember it. No one asked your name. They already know why you're walking. On the morning of the 3rd day, the frost bites sharper. The sun barely rises. It just glows faintly through a lid of pale clouds. You crest a hill, and there it is, the meeting. Not a camp, not a rebellion, just a shape in the land. A wide ring of people gathered around an old, fire-blackened stone in a frozen clearing. They stand, wrapped in cloaks and hoods, faces hidden but posture familiar. No banners, no drums, just breathing, just presence. You and Eli approach slowly. A man gestures to a place in the circle. You join. No one speaks for a long time. Finally, someone steps forward. A woman, middle-aged, solid, hands stained with dye. "I was there," she says. "My brother too. They took him after the charter burned. But I'm still here." She places a small carving at the center of the circle. A hand, open, then she steps back. Another comes. A boy no older than 15. "My grandfather marched." He said the king looked scared. He said that was the only time he ever saw that in a lord's eyes. He places a piece of red yarn, then steps back. One by one they come, some with tokens, some with stories. A nail, a bundle of feathers, a scrap of cloth. One man places a single seed. No speeches, no cheers, just memory. Here's your major historical fact. Gatherings like this, sometimes called silent rings or memory circles, are referenced in 3 known 15th century sermons as examples of dangerous rural assemblies. They weren't religious, though the church watched them carefully, and they weren't political in the formal sense. But their persistence unnerved the authorities, because people standing together in stillness, remembering injustice, that was harder to break than mobs with sticks. Your strange cultural tidbit. In some counties, participants of these memory gatherings wore a small knot of wool on the inside of their cloaks. The wool had been dyed from a sheep less than 1 year old and twisted by hand. It wasn't for decoration. It was a signal. You could show it to someone else. Quietly, like a password without a word. Over time, it came to mean, I remember what they forgot. You look around. The fire in the center of the ring is small, crackling softly. Smoke rises straight into the sky, like it's afraid to bend. Then Eli steps forward. He holds nothing, but he speaks. "I walk there. I walk back. And I walk still." That's all. He returns to the circle, hands shaking only slightly. Then it's your turn. You step forward, not because you want to speak, but because something inside you won't let you stay silent. You say, "I saw a boy promise the world. I saw a man fall for asking it to be true. I saw silence swallow fire. And I see that we're still here." You place a small crow carving in the snow, and you return to your place. The ring holds. The fire burns. Above, crows circle once, and then disappear toward the horizon. Historians still debate the purpose of these gatherings. Some call them ritualized mourning. Others insist they were early attempts at collective bargaining, an embryonic form of unionism. But the records are sparse, and most participants, if asked, would likely have said the same thing. We're just standing together. Sometimes that's all history is. That night, after the ring disperses and tokens are gently buried beneath pine branches, you and Eli find shelter in the ruin of a chapel. There's no roof, just stars. No altar, just moss. But it feels sacred in the way memory always does. You sleep against a stone wall, back to the past, face toward what might come next. And for the first time in many months, you don't dream of fire. You dream of soil. Let's follow the road again tomorrow. For now, let's rest beneath these stars. They remember, too. The walk home is slower. You're not in a hurry. No one is. The path winds through woodlands hushed by frost and age, and every branch seems to lean closer, as if trying to hear what happened at the gathering near Canterbury, as if the trees themselves keep records, just not in ink. Eli walks beside you, quiet. Occasionally, he kicks a rock or hums an off-key tune. You don't speak much. You don't need to. The silence between you is full. You pass a cottage with a crow painted on the door. Not large, not hidden, just there. A statement. You knock. A woman answers. She eyes you, sees your boots, your cloak, your travel-worn face. Then she nods once and offers water. You drink. Thank her. Move on. That's how it is now. No passwords. Just recognition. Here's your major historical fact. In the early 15th century, a shift occurred in rural England's social behavior. Though open revolt didn't rise again at the same scale for nearly another century, peasants and laborers began practicing a more coordinated form of passive resistance, refusing corvée labor under declaring crop yields, ignoring feudal summons. Lord responded with fines, but enforcement became difficult. The fear of another 1380, one lingered, as one noble wrote in a surviving letter. Their compliance is but a coat. It may be turned. You stop at a stream on the second day. The water is cold, clear, biting at your fingertips. You fill your water skin while Eli tries to balance on a rock that was not made for balancing. He falls in with a splash and swears like a scholar dropped his ink. You laugh. It's been a while since you did that. That night, you camp in the ruins of an old watchtower. Someone has been here before. There's a mark carved into stone, a small circle, a line through it, a symbol known to you now. We were here. We still are. You sleep under a roof of stars again. The wind whispers through cracked stone. It doesn't chill you this time. It feels like breath, like language. In the morning, you rise, stretch, and eat the last of your dry bread. Eli finds a patch of mint growing wild in the frost. He chews it with a grimace and declares it hopeful but aggressive. You walk on, back in your village. People greet you with more than nods. They offer food, ask questions gently, not about what you did, but about what you heard, about whether others came, about what was said and unsaid. You don't give speeches. You're not John Ball. You just tell stories. You say, there were more than I expected. You say, the fire was real. You say, no one's forgotten, and that's enough. People nod and go back to their work, but they walk differently afterward, like something shifted in their shoulders. You spend the next few days fixing a fence, trading flour for beans, carving small things in the evening. The crow on your shelf is joined by a wooden hand, then a tree, then a small circle of flame. Your strange cultural tidbit. For many decades after 1381, storytelling gatherings became more common during winter months in rural parishes. These were informal, often tied to Yule season, and featured tales not just of saints or spirits, but of the day the common man stood tall. Children were taught songs with lines like, the crown may shine, the seal may speak, but what we build they cannot break. By 1420, chroniclers began complaining of low-born gatherings where false history is passed like ale, which is, frankly, the best endorsement those tales could ask for. On the fifth night after your return, a visitor knocks at your door. Not a stranger. A smith from a village 2 hills east. You recognize him. He walked in the same circle at Canterbury. He doesn't come inside. He just says, it's happening again. Small, careful, but soon. You nod. He leaves. Eli appears behind you. Do we go? You look at your fire, your carvings, the crow. You think about the oak on the hill, the circle of stones in the snow, the flame that still dances in people's eyes when they say Tyler or Ball. Then you say, not yet, but we'll be ready. Historians still debate whether the Peasants' Revolt was a singular event or the beginning of a long, rolling transformation. But they agree on this. After 1381, no one in power ever truly believed again that the common folk would stay silent forever. And the common folk, they stopped believing that power would always wear a crown. The wind rises outside. You pull your cloak tighter. You sit by the fire. And you carve. The snow begins to melt. Not in a rush. Not with drama. Just slowly, politely. It recedes from fields like a guest who overstayed, but left the dishes clean. Grass reappears in patches, half frozen and bent, but living. You walk the edge of the thawed ground each morning, noting where green dares to return first. Eli calls it the land's apology. The village moves a little faster now. Boots splash in puddles. Roofs drip. Chickens grow bolder. Someone's goat escapes 3 times in 2 days, and by the 3rd, no one bothers chasing it. But beneath all this, something else is changing. You begin to see them again. Small gatherings. A shared glance between neighbors. The appearance of more symbols. Painted on barn doors. Etched into gateposts. Scratched into stone near the mill. A boot print within a circle. A rising flame. A line of 3 crows. The language is growing. You speak it now without speaking at all. One afternoon, while trading egg for seed, the old tanner pulls you aside. He leans close and whispers, "They're calling a spring circle, near the bend in the river. Equinox." You nod. He adds, "The message was carved into an ox yoke." You raise an eyebrow. He grins. "Nobody checks those." You return home and tell Eli. He doesn't ask if you're going. He just sharpens his knife and begins shaping a new token. This one will be different, more detailed. He says the crow with a root for a tail, to remind them that we're not flying away. You smile, but it lingers, because this time, it's not just remembering, it's becoming. Here's your major historical fact. While the English ruling class continued to suppress uprisings in the decades after 1381, they could not stop the emergence of a new peasant identity, one that was increasingly literate, organized, and bound not just by locality, but shared experience. By the mid-1400s, laborers' guilds and informal peasant assemblies began coordinating market prices, collective bargaining, and tax protests across villages. The idea of just doing as you're told had fractured. It wasn't a revolution anymore. It was culture. You walk the road to the river bend the night before the equinox. The moon is nearly full, the path wide and glistening with thaw. You and Eli carry no banner, no message, just yourselves and your tokens, his crow, your open hand carved from ash wood. Your heart beats slower than usual, but deeper, like a drum, not yet struck. When you arrive, the fire is already lit. It's small, half hidden behind brambles, but steady. Around it, maybe 20 people. Not many, but not few. One of them nods at you as you step into the ring. You recognize no one. You recognize everyone. A woman stands, speaks softly. We've remembered. We've waited. But now we build. There's no reply, just quiet. Then a man steps forward with a scroll, rough parchment, hand-cut, edges curling like bread crust. He says, "We're writing it down this time." He unrolls it, holds over the firelight, and reads. "We gather not to shout, but to shape. We gather not to burn, but to build. We gather not for rage, but for root. Let them forget. We will remember. Let them own the past. We will shape what comes." He places it in a tin box, seals it with wax, and hands it to a woman who nods solemnly and disappears into the woods with it. You don't ask where it's going. You know it will survive. Your strange cultural tidbit. By the late 1400s, a tradition emerged among rural artisans of burying small, sealed scrolls inside stone walls when constructing barns, wells, or fences. Most were practical notes, weather, harvest records, names. But some included odes, small declarations of justice, or the names of those lost to hangings, floggings, or forgotten rebellion. Modern archaeologists have found dozens of these. Most were unsigned. A few bore marks, like the open hand or the flame. What was once rebellion became ritual. You don't sleep that night. You and Eli walk home in the dark, the stars above wide-eyed, the trees finally still. And you talk, not about what was, but about what might be. Eli says maybe there's a way to keep track of it all. Maybe not just carvings or marks, but a way for every village to share names, send warnings, teach trades, pass ideas. You ask how. He shrugs. Maybe with song, maybe with stories, maybe with feet. And you say, maybe with memory. You reach your door, you hang your token, you light your fire, and you whisper to the flame, we are still here. Historians still debate the long-term effects of these spring gatherings. Were they organized movements or simply seasonal echoes of forgotten rebellion? But one thing is clear. The stories of 1381 never disappeared. They evolved, and every act of remembering made forgetting just a little harder. Let's keep walking with you. There's a hill ahead, and something waiting just beyond it. The hill ahead isn't particularly steep, but it slows you. Not your legs. They're stronger now than they were last spring. It slows something deeper. As you climb, you realize it's not the incline that slows you, but the weight of knowing. The sense that what waits at the top is not just view, but change. The path is quiet, not empty. There are footsteps in the mud, some old, some fresh. Others have walked this way, and some have turned back, but most seem to go forward. At the crest, you stop. Below, spread across the valley like a forgotten map, is the town of Faversham, large in your village, busy with market stalls and chatter, but quieter now than you remember it. Not in noise, but in posture. The people walk straighter. Their glances linger longer. There's a kind of quiet knowing in the way they move. You feel it even from here. Eli catches up behind you, breathing hard. Looks the same, he says, then adds, but doesn't feel the same. You nod. There's a reason you've come. Word reached your village a week ago. A trial. Not for theft, not for violence, but for speaking. A man named Tom, a miller's son, had stood in the churchyard and asked why the steward's tithe was greater this year, when the harvest was smaller. A fair question. He was arrested within the hour. You don't know Tom, but you know that question. You've asked it in your head 100 times. You've heard on roads, in fields, around fires. It's not treason. It's hunger in words. You enter Faversham quietly. No weapons. No banners. Just a crow carved into the leather cord around your neck. You see others. A woman selling onions with a flame drawn in chalk beside her stall. A child with an open hand etched into his wooden toy. A priest whose robe hem carries a stitch boot. None of them say a word, but you all walk the same direction. The trial is held in the old hall, a cold, echoing place that smells of wood rot and politics. The magistrate is a man with a name longer than his patience. He reads the charges slowly, like he's tasting each one for effect. Tom stands with hands bound. He doesn't look afraid. He looks awake. The steward reads his account. He paints Tom as disruptive, dangerous, a threat to order. Then Tom is asked to speak. He says only this. If asking a question is treason, then what should we call silence? The room does not cheer. It does not groan. It simply breathes. One person coughs. Another adjusts their cloak. And then a man in the back raises a hand. Open, unthreatening. The magistrate ignores it. But another hand rises. And another, not fists, just hands. Until half the room is filled with open palms. The magistrate clears his throat and closes the scroll. There will be no punishment today, he mutters. You leave the hall in silence, but not emptiness. Here's your major historical fact. In the early 15th century, trials for sedition became more frequent, but convictions became harder to secure. As peasant identity evolved and communal solidarity grew stronger, local juries began refusing to convict their neighbors. Royal magistrates complained that justice is drowned in familiarity. But the truth was simpler. People had begun to draw a line between law and fairness. The law could be feared, but fairness was trusted. Your strange cultural tidbit. In Kent and parts of East Anglia, a tradition called the silent answer developed in local courts. When asked a question, some peasants would refuse to speak, instead raising one hand in a specific gesture. Open palm out, thumb tucked, fingers close together. It meant, I see you, but I won't feed your lie. Eventually outlawed. It persisted in local folklore and, centuries later, was mimicked by labor movements as a sign of solidarity. You leave Faversham that night. No one speaks of the trial, not openly, but the symbols multiply. Chalk on stones, carvings on fence rails, a handful of grain left carefully at a crossroads. You and Eli return to the road. You don't talk much, but you both know they saw us. Historians still debate how effective these microacts of resistance were. Some say they were symbolic at best. Others argue they created a cultural immunity to oppression, a system of values passed down not in documents, but in gestures, phrases, and silence. What's undeniable is that, by the late 1400s, no lord ruled without at least considering what the commons would tolerate. You walk into the dusk. The stars begin to prick holes in the sky. Eli says, "He didn't even yell, just stood there." You nod. That's what scared them, you say, and the night deepens around you. But this time, it feels like a blanket, not a curtain. Let's walk a little farther with you, while the road is soft. There are still lights ahead, and stories waiting at the next turn. Spring becomes more than a rumor. It arrives in the slow bloom of wildflowers along the road's edge, in the mud that finally begins to dry, and in the way people start leaving their doors open again, just a crack, as if testing whether the world is ready to be trusted. You smell it first in the air, green, uncertain, sweet like something new remembering how to live. Your feet find old paths easily now. The road to the next village doesn't feel long. Even the hills feel less like obstacles and more like places to stand tall. Eli walks with a growing confidence. His eyes linger more. He listens better. He's learned, you think, the difference between a crowd and a circle, between a chant and a silence filled with knowing. One day, while passing through a patch of old forest near Lymange, you find a new mark, carved into the bark of sycamore, a loop chain broken in the middle. Beneath it, a flame, carefully done. Someone spent time on this. Eli touches the edge of it with his finger. They're not just remembering, he says. They're marking territory. You nod. You reach the village before noon. A small one, tucked behind hedgerows and bramble. From a distance, it looks unchanged. But as you get closer, you notice the fences are newly reinforced. The windows show fresh cloth. The animals seem better fed. Something's thriving here. You ask the reeve, an old habit now. A woman with white streaked hair and sharp eyes point you to the old mill house. Inside, you find a man who isn't what you expected. He's young, thin, hands ink-stained. A miller's son again, though not the one from the trial. You introduce yourself with your hands, just fingertips to chest, thumb closed, palm toward the heart. He returns a gesture. You sit. No small talk, just purpose. He opened a chest and reveals a small stack of carefully wrapped papers. Notes, poems, symbols, names. At least 24 villages listed, most from Kent, some as far as Suffolk. You don't need to ask what this is. You know, it's not a rebellion. It's a record. Here's your major historical fact. By the late 1400s, what scholars now call peasant cartographies began to appear. Unofficial maps created by laborers and rural organizers, charting not roads and rivers, but relationships. Sympathetic villages, friendly reeves, untrustworthy lords, hidden allies. None survive in their entirety today. Many were burned, buried, or absorbed into guild archives, but fragments remain in church walls and court records. Some even made it into monastic chronicles, misinterpreted as lists of heretical sympathizers. These maps weren't about directions. They were about connection. The young man hands you a fresh sheet. It's blank. Add your village, he says. You hesitate, not from fear, from responsibility. But then, you dip the pen and write it carefully, as if the ink might someday carry the weight of every hungry voice that passed through its gates. You leave that night, carrying more than you arrived with. A name, a place, a thread, your strange cultural tidbit. In parts of rural England, it became common to name certain paths Whisper Lanes. These were small, winding trails between villages, rarely traveled by cart, often overgrown, but regularly walked by those carrying messages, letters, or simply news. In some folklore, It was said that if you stood in a whisper lane at dusk and listened closely, you'd hear stories from other villages carried on the wind. You and Eli find one of those lanes on your way back. Narrow, quiet, it curves like a question. Halfway through, he stops walking and says, "What if we build something?" You raise a brow. He shrugs. Not a rebellion. A place. A real one. For people like us. Not to hide. Just to be. You smile at the absurdity. And at the possibility. You mean like a village? He shakes his head. No. A space. Somewhere no steward has a seat. Where stories don't have to be whispered. You don't answer. But the idea hangs in the air like a leaf that refuses to fall. Historians still debate whether any such free spaces truly existed. There are tales of outlaw villages, of forest clearings where former rebels built homes, of communities that answered to no lord. Most historians call them myths, romantic nonsense. But in a few parish rolls, there are sudden disappearances, fields unclaimed, roads no longer patrolled, and in one margin a monk's note, gone into the wind. You reach your village by moonlight. The fields glisten with dew. The oak still stands on the hill. But now, at its base, someone has planted a circle of stones, and in the center, a wooden stake carved with the flame. Not yours, someone else's. You stare at it, heart slow. This is no longer remembrance. This is movement. Let's pause here for the night. There's something stirring in the dark, and it's not afraid anymore. The days stretch longer now. The sun lingers in the evenings, casting gold across the furrows and fences, gilding even the mud. Children stay out later. Chickens seem bolder. And the crows, always the crows, follow your walks with casual interest, as if taking notes. Your village moves in undercurrent, not hurried, but humming. The steward hasn't returned in 2 weeks. No one's asked where he went. A boy claimed to have seen him ride west with 2 full bags and no intention of returning. Another said he was ill, but no one's knocked on his door. The lock rusts, the shutter stays shut, and the chickens seem pleased with themselves. At the well, someone is on a loop of woven straw, just a circle tied 3 times. Below it, a flat stone with crow and a root scratched into its face. No one speaks of it. But you notice people drawing water more slowly, like they're stopping to read. Eli spends most days now carving. He's improved. His new pieces are smaller, more intricate. Pendants, beads, tokens. He trades them quietly for grain, for cloth, for stories. Not everyone wants one. But those who do wear them under their cloaks, near their skin, like memory turned into heartbeat. One evening you gather at the oak. A dozen of you. No meeting was called. No messenger sent, but you arrive and they arrive, and no one needs to ask why. Someone lights a fire. A child offers berries. An old woman begins singing. Not a song of mourning, but of weather. The kind of tune that keeps rhythm while planting. Then someone, Gareth, a wheelwright, stands and says, "We're not hiding anymore." A long silence follows. Then nods. Then stillness. But it's a charged stillness. Like kindling just before the spark. Here's your major historical fact. By the mid-15th century, several rural communities across England began electing informal leaders. Not stewards, not reeves, but speakers. Unofficial representatives chosen by consensus to speak on behalf of the village in dealings with the crown, the church, or traveling lords. These figures had no legal standing, but they had power, communal trust. They became the voice when no one else could speak safely. Your village has never had one. Until now, a week after the fire gathering. People begin stopping you in the lanes at the edge of fields in quiet corners. They don't say the word, but they ask what you think. About trade, about who should be let in, about what stories to pass on to children. Eli grins when he notices it. "You're the speaker now," he says one morning, mouthful of cheese and confidence. "Congratulations." You try to object. Say it's not formal. Say you're not a leader. He shrugs. Neither was Tyler. At first, you carry the thought all day. It follows you into sleep. Your strange cultural tidbit. In Kentish dialect of the 15th century, the phrase "the eye of the crow" came to mean the one who sees and says nothing until it matters. It was both compliment and warning. In some villages, it became a nickname for those who quietly observed but acted decisively. A few guilds even adopted it as a role. Crow eyes, watchers and messengers between settlements. Silent, swift, rarely seen. Their messages were never written, only spoken, only remembered. You begin walking farther, to the next village, then the next, not as a trader, not as a scout, just a presence. You listen, you note who's hungry, who's hurting, who still wears a mark. You speak when invited, and when you leave, you carve a small symbol into the lowest post of the nearest gate, a crow's wing folded in a circle. You begin to notice them, too, in towns you didn't mark, scratched on stone, etched into wood, inked onto cloth hanging behind stalls. Historians still debate whether a true network of rural communication existed during the decades following the revolt. There are no written records, but patterns emerge, coordinated protests, sudden refusals to pay tithes across multiple counties, and stories that appear simultaneously in villages days apart. One monk wrote, "The people move like fog. You see no hand, yet your coin is missing." You return home after a week on the road. The village greets you not with words, but with gestures. Someone places bread at your door. A child leaves a carved seed. And someone, unknown, has written a single word in ash on the oak tree. Soon. You touch it gently with your palm, not to erase it, but to firm it. You sit by your hearth that night. Eli is asleep by the fire. The tokens on the shelf have multiplied. Now a small crowd. Shapes of root and flame, of eyes, of wings, of open hands. Each one a voice, each one a choice. You are not alone anymore, and the silence you once carried now feels like a drumbeat in the chest of every person who knows your name without saying it. Let's rest here a while. The world is watching, but this time you're watching back. There's a rhythm now, not the kind dictated by harvest or bells, but something quieter, deeper, a pulse in the soil, a silence between footsteps, a collective pause before decisions are made, not out of fear, but out of respect for something larger than any one voice. Your village, once a dot on a map even the tax collectors forgot to squint at, has become something else, a node, a name that travels. You hear it whispered when strangers pass through. You see it etched on a traveler's staff, a flame with roots and wings. It's subtle, small, but unmistakable. Someone walks across counties carrying the symbol of your village like its protection. You tend your usual tasks, mending a fence, drying herbs, helping repair a neighbor's wheel. But now, in each chore there is something sacred. The ordinary has weight. Even the mud feels heavier with meaning. Eli, of course, notices nothing in everything. He sharpens tools, whistles like a man who's never had fear sewn into his ribs, and carves tokens like a second language. "I think they're going to ask for more," he says one afternoon, flipping a crow-shaped bead between his fingers. Not just stories, not just memory, but decisions. You nod. It's already happening. The next village meeting confirms it, held in the clearing under the oak, the air smelling faintly of peat and thawed moss. A small crowd gathers. No one called it. They just came, not to argue, but to organize. A woman named Lynette stands and says, "There's a merchant near Canterbury who refuses to trade with anyone marked." You don't need to ask what marked means. Another says, "A steward from Elam is demanding doubled rents, only from those who marched." Someone else adds, "They're making lists again." The fire in your chest, once a flicker, begins to rise. Here's your major historical fact. In the later 1400s, the English crown resumed attempts to identify and catalog dissident villages. These lists, some accurate, some pure speculation, were passed to sheriffs and minor nobles. Villages suspected of harboring organized commoners often faced tax hikes, withheld grain, or conscription raids. But these pressures often had the opposite effect. They drove villages closer together. In some areas, neighboring communities shared crops, labor, and livestock to avoid starvation under punitive levies. Solidarity, once ideal, became survival. Your village chooses to act. Quietly, of course. A system of watchers is formed, not spies, but eyes. People who walk the roads, check the woods, speak in the markets, and return with soft intelligence. You don't record names. You don't send messages. You send stories. A song here, a token there, a single apple left at the corner of a well. Your strange cultural tidbit. Across the southeast of England, it became tradition to bake messages into pies. Not paper, but symbols, sliced roots, burned seeds, specific arrangements of crust. A crow pie might include 3 cloves arranged in a triangle. A root pie had a tiny twist of vine. These pies were sent as gifts, often exchanged between distant villages, sometimes as peace, sometimes as a warning. One arrives at your door, unmarked, except for a pattern of tiny holes in crust. A line, a loop, a hand. You understand. You don't eat it. You gather your cloak. The next morning, you and Eli set out for the far village. A day's walk. Along the way, you notice symbols freshly etched into mile markers. These weren't there last week. One shows a crow with an arrow through it. Another, an open I scratched out. Someone is warning you, and someone else is hunting. At the village edge, a group waits. Not large, not armed, but ready. They received more than a pie. They've seen torches near their outer fields. One family's cart was sabotaged. A boy was taken by force and returned hours later, silent. "We didn't do anything," one man says, voice trembling. You reply calmly, "That's why they're afraid." You help them reinforce the barn, secure the paths, post watches on the ridge. That night, you eat with them in a circle of firelight. No one tells stories. No one sings. But they all listen to the woods, to the wind, to the silence. You stay until the next morning. Before you go, a woman gives you a seed and a cloth bundle. "For my father," she says. "He said to pass it on when the world forgets what growth means." You take it, carefully. Historians still debate the scale of coordination among commoners in the 15th century. Some argue it was local and sporadic. Others point to patterns of language, tradition, and resistance that appear too frequently to be coincidence. One historian wrote, "The rebellion ended, but the rebellion somehow kept walking." You and Eli walk back under a rising sun, carrying a seed, a story, and the sound of a village that remembers. When you reach your home, you bury the seed at the base of the oak. No plaque, no marker, just memory. You whisper something into the soil, though the words don't matter. Only the act, only the echo. Let's pause here tonight. The soil is soft, and something has begun to grow. The mornings arrive warmer now. Mist still clings to the grass like a shy guest, but it leaves early. Birds return in full orchestration, each with their own score, none particularly coordinated, but all determined to be heard. Even the sheep seem to bleat with more confidence, as if they've survived something they'll never fully explain. You wake with purpose. You listen for news not from kings or courts, but from wells, from songs, from what fruit arrives early at market, and which baker suddenly runs out of flour. You don't read letters. You read patterns. Eli spends his mornings walking the perimeter of the fields, carving small tokens and hanging them from trees like whispered prayers. He's taken to naming them dramatically. "This one," he says, holding up a crooked flame etched into driftwood, "is for people who say we're just following orders." You nod and hang it anyway. The village is no longer just yours, not in the sense of ownership, but of responsibility. Strangers pass through now, carefully chosen ones. They don't stay long, just long enough to leave a message, ask a question, or confirm a path. You learn to cook more meals than usual. People are always a little hungry when they carry stories. One morning, a rider appears. Not a noble, not a messenger. A woman on a tired horse, cloak road-stained, hair wild, eyes alert. She carries no blade, just a walking stick and a token looped at her belt. A root woven into the shape of a crow's foot. She says, "They've taken the village near the marsh." No one asks which they. Everyone understands. Here's your major historical fact. During the late 15th century, particularly in the 1480s, private mercenary bands began operating semi-independently of noble orders, often hired by landlords to enforce order in rural areas. While not officially sanctioned by the crown, their actions were tolerated, if not quietly encouraged. These groups extorted labor, took grain, and sometimes kidnapped individuals for ransom or punishment. Many villages formed silent pacts to avoid open conflict, trading knowledge, hiding dissenters, and relocating families to avoid retribution. You've heard of these bands, but this is the first time they're this close. The rider's name is Sarah. She stays the night, sits with you by the fire, and outlines what she saw: houses burned, grain taken, 3 people missing. She managed to help one family escape, a boy and his grandmother now hidden with her sister near the coast. You ask how she got away. She smiles without humor. They don't look twice at people who limp. She shows you her boot, stuffed with straw, stained at the ankle. They think pain means weakness, she adds. They're wrong. You're a strange cultural tidbit. In response to mercenary activity, many villagers began using deliberate signs of frailty, limps, canes, false coughs, to appear harmless to roving enforcers. Some even shared techniques for feigning illness convincingly. It became a subtle act of survival. In one account, a woman reportedly faked madness for 6 years, speaking only in proverbs and planting turnips on rooftops to avoid arrest. Her village called her the Oracle and consulted her before every decision. You ask Sarah what she needs. She says, memory. So you gather everyone, not to plan a battle, not for vengeance, but to witness. Sarah speaks. She tells the story slowly, naming the people, the street corners, the shape of the barn roof that burned, the sound of the child's cry. She speaks with the precision of someone who refuses to let a single detail be lost to the wind. When she finishes, no one claps. No one needs to. Instead, the baker stands and says, "We'll send grain." The carpenter adds, "I'll walk to the coast. Check on the boy." Eli offers 5 tokens, each marked with a small crescent and 2 dots, the new symbol for loss carried forward. You, of course, do what you always do. You listen, and then you write, not on parchment, not with ink, but in gesture. You hang a token on the oak. You plant a second seed. You light a fire and let the smoke rise in a pattern agreed upon weeks ago. 3 short bursts, 1 long. Someone watching from the hills will know. You're not alone. Historians still debate how widespread these informal aid systems were. Some argue they were little more than neighborly kindness. Others suggest they represent one of the earliest forms of organized mutual aid, predating formal unions or communes. In one preserved letter, a lord complains that the fields speak to one another more quickly than the roads allow. You walk Sarah to the edge of the village the next morning. She thanks you without saying the words. Instead, she touches her token, nods once, and disappears down the whisper lane. You watch until the trees take her. Then you return home and dig a new hole beside the others. The seed you bury today is different, not for food, not for memory, but for a future that needs both. Let's stop here just for a moment. Breathe in. The air smells like mint and wood smoke, and under your feet, everything is quietly waking. There's a new wind in the mornings now. It comes from the east, fresh off the coast, cutting through hedgerows and barns like a messenger in a hurry. It brings a scent of brine and ash, of something burned but still standing. The kind of wind that reminds you the world is wide, and that your corner of it is being watched. You begin to see more strangers on the road. Not many, not all at once. Just enough to notice that some boots don't match the mud, that some cloaks are stitched with thread, not sold within 50 miles, that some hands grip walking sticks a little too tightly, like they're waiting for orders that haven't yet come. You say nothing, but you watch, because that's what speakers do now. Eli tells you he's heard of a camp in the woods north of Ashford. Not a village, a camp. They call it the Hollow. People with no homes or no names or no patience left for waiting. Some are wounded, others are wanted. A few, he says, carry books. Real books, he adds. Ones that smell like church and rebellion. You ask him how he knows. He grins. The crows told me. You don't laugh, because you know what he means. The crow population has, somehow grown, or perhaps you've just become better at seeing them. One perches on your roof every morning now, tapping once before sunrise. Another waits by the well, like a clock you didn't wind. They watch you the way you watch others, with interest and purpose, and the kind of unsettling patience that says, I will be here longer than you. One morning, there's a note on your doorstep. No seal, no signature, just 6 words. They know your village by name. You burn it, then gather your things. Here's your major historical fact. During the final decades of the 15th century, the line between rebellion and organization blurred. In some regions, particularly southern England, villages began appointing informal emissaries. Speakers who traveled not just to trade, but to deliver coordinated information. They weren't messengers. They were memory bearers, walking archives who carried not papers, but songs, signs, and verbal pacts. Some scholars believe this oral network sustained pre-printed systems of resistance long before labor unions formed. You are now one of them, whether you like it or not. You leave your village before dawn. No fanfare, just a hand pressed to the oak, a whispered goodbye to Eli, and a pouch of root pie tucked under your cloak. Your destination, the hollow. You walk 3 days through thinning woods, avoiding the main roads. You sleep once in a barn and once in a hollow tree. You eat only what you can trade. You speak only when spoken to. And on the 3rd day, just past an abandoned millstone, you find the path. It's not marked by symbols, but by absence. A quiet too purposeful to be natural. A bend in the trees that doesn't follow the wind. And then people, dozens, maybe more, gathered in a clearing too organized to be accidental. Canvas tents, bark-walled lean-tos, a fire ring with iron, children sharpening sticks with intent, elders speaking in turns. You don't announce yourself. Someone sees a token at your neck and nods you through. You're offered food, a seat, and then questions, not about where you come from, but about what you've seen. You answer carefully, truthfully. You name the steward who vanished, the merchant who won't trade, the burned village, the rider with a limp, the seed you planted. No one writes it down, but every head nods, every glance sharpens. Then a man stands. He's older, broad-shouldered, quiet. His right hand is missing 3 fingers. His cloak is lined with teeth. Wolf, dog, something else. He introduces himself simply. Call me Turn. He says, we are not fighters. We are reminders. We remind the land of its promises. We remind the old names what they owe. We remind the hungry that they were not always so. Then he walks to a tree and carves a small spiral into the bark. Around it, he draws a flame. We are not trying to win, he says. We are trying to outlast. Your strange cultural tidbit. In forest camps like the Hollow, it became customary to name trees instead of tents. Each tree bore a name passed down orally. Quietfoot, Sevenheart, Turn's Wake. These names were used in place of directions. Instead of saying, meet me by the fire, one might say, meet me under a member. Some of these tree names pass into legend, and a few were later mapped, long after the camps had vanished. You stay in the Hollow for 5 days. You learn more than you can explain. How to write a message with 3 stones and a feather. How to signal distress by where you leave your knife in the mud. How to turn an argument into a parable before it becomes fight. You also learn something else. They're not waiting. They're preparing. Historians still debate whether places like the Hollow ever truly existed. No direct record remains. No maps, no court documents, no royal complaints. But stories persist in folktales and margin notes, in warnings passed down 3 generations removed. One 16th century priest wrote in frustration, their god is memory, their temple is a tree, and their prayer is each other. On your last night in the Hollow, someone sings. The song has no words, just hums and claps. The whole camp joins in, soft at first, then full. You add your voice, unsure then steady, because the point isn't music. The point is that you're singing together. And somewhere, someone is listening. Even now, let's stop here in the flicker of that firelight. Your voice is hoarse, but your heart is not. You leave the hollow just before dawn, not because you're unwelcome, far from it, but because places like the hollow are meant to disappear, meant to shift, to fold into the trees before anyone has time to count its corners or memorize its faces. Turn nods as you go. No words, just a slow tap of his fist over his chest, and then over the tree beside him, a goodbye shared between person and place. You walk with the rising sun behind your back. The earth still cool from the night's breath. The sky is pale lavender. Birds begin again. And with each step, you carry not just the stories, but their silence too. The way they didn't ask you to stay. The way they trusted you to leave. You don't return to your village immediately. Instead, you take the longer road. Through fields just beginning to green, along streams that have long since forgotten the frost, past farms that look quiet, but not abandoned. In one, you spot a girl hanging cloth on a line. She sees you, doesn't wave, just raises her hand to her brow, mimicking the shape of a crow's wing. You return the gesture. It's enough. You sleep that night in the loft of a ruined chapel. No roof, just stars. A crossbeam holds your bag. A mouse scurries over the altar. It feels sacred in the strangest, most honest way. Here's your major historical fact. By 1490, many abandoned religious buildings across rural England, particularly chapels and roadside shrines, had become gathering points for traveling workers, dissenters, and the newly landless. These spaces, once sacred by design, became sacred by function. Places of shelter, decision, and sometimes coded worship. A few were later reclaimed by the church, but others simply vanished into hedge and vine, their purpose fulfilled without permission. You wake with a leaf in your hair and a new message in your boot. Literally, a scrap of fabric, tied with twine, stuffed under your heel. You don't remember putting it there. You unfold it carefully. A drawn symbol, 2 eyes closed, and beneath it, 3 lines. The steward returns. He does not come alone. Speak while you still can. You pack quickly. No breakfast. No pause. Only the road. When you arrive back in your village, it feels smaller somehow. Not in size. In the way a home looks smaller after you've seen the wider world. You notice the details instantly. The way no smoke curls from the smithy. The way the goats have been brought inside. The way every window seems just slightly too closed. You find Eli by the oak. He's not carving. He's waiting. He doesn't speak at first. Just looks past you to the ridge. He brought men, he says, finally, from the coast. They've got coins, and contracts, and permission. You ask from who? He shrugs. Anyone who still wants order more than truth. Your strange cultural tidbit. In moment of fear, some villages adopted the practice of hanging listening cloths, scraps of fabric dipped in herbs and strung on windows or door frames, ostensibly to absorb bad air or ill spirits. They also serve as a subtle signal. We're listening. Say nothing. In parts of Kent, rosemary and onion skin were most common. Later, these became associated with mourning, though originally they were about survival. You and Eli spend the evening walking quietly through the village. People nod. No one speaks of the steward. But someone leaves a token in your hand as you pass. A piece of bone, shaped into a spiral, still warm. At the well, you find Sarah. She arrived that morning, with her limp, and a message. They're gathering names again, she says. Not just the old ones. The new ones, too. Yours, mine, his. She doesn't point. You don't need her to. You ask what they'll do. She says, they'll offer peace. You raise an eyebrow. She nods. The kind that tastes like ash. That night, the steward walks into the village square, cloaked in gray, clean boots, 3 men behind him, none local, none smiling. He speaks of order, of safety, of the king's grace, of the need to reestablish structure. He says the word 3 times, structure, 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 as if repeating it makes it edible. No one cheers. No one leaves. He reads a list. Your name is not on it. Yet, but Eli's is. Sarah's is the baker's wife, the old man with no tongue. You count them as he names them. 12. 12 flames in the dark, being told they are smoke. Historians still debate whether these lists were drawn from actual records or invented whole cloth by stewards trying to assert relevance. In some cases, evidence shows that former rebels were left alone while others, quiet figures with no clear cause, were suddenly targeted. It was less justice, more narrative control, a way to rewrite the rebellion while the ink was still drying. You don't sleep that night. Instead, you sit beneath the oak, carving your own token. Not a flame, not a crow, but of a door, a small round arch carved into a seed. Because it's not about closing, it's about opening before they can lock it for good. Let's rest here briefly. The door is almost ready, and you will not be the one knocking. It rains the next morning, not the gentle, cleansing kind that kisses leaves and makes poets sigh, but the kind that soaks the ground with intent. A rain that feels deliberate, stern, as if the sky itself has chosen sides and is now washing away anything that won't stand firm. You wake to the sound of it beating down on the thatch above your head, drumming like a warning, rhythmic, low, and constant. The kind of rain that keeps secrets inside and voices low. When you step outside, the village is quiet, not empty, just muted. A child splashes in a puddle near the well. Someone sheep bleat loudly from inside a barn. But the usual greetings and nods, the half smiles, the lazy mornings have vanished like smoke. The steward has taken up residence in the old chapel. Fitting, really. He's turned the altar into a desk, covered with scrolls and ledgers and a ceremonial blade he never uses but always displays. His boots rest on a cracked tile that once held a painted angel. He holds meetings now, twice a day, mandatory. Community integration reviews, he calls them. You and Eli call them what they are, surveys in disguise. He asks questions like, have you heard any unfamiliar songs in the village? Or, do you know where your neighbors go at night? Or the old favorite, do you feel safe under current circumstances? He records the answers slowly, with theatrical importance, never looking up, never letting silence go unpunished. And every day, the list grows shorter. One by one, names vanish. Some quietly leave in the night. Some stop speaking. Some are simply gone by morning. Here's your major historical fact. During periods of rural suppression in late 15th century England, many stewards and sheriffs employed voluntary relocation notices, a euphemism for soft exile. Villagers were encouraged, and sometimes gently coerced, to leave their homes under the guise of reducing tension clusters. No formal arrests were made, no trials, just notices and absences. Eli begins making a new kind of token, not of wings or flame or seed, but of mouths, closed ones, open ones, some with teeth. He calls them echoes. You carry 3 of them now. Sarah, meanwhile, has taken to sitting near the chapel during the steward's meetings. She doesn't attend. She just listens, spinning a small stone in her fingers, over and over, like she's grinding something invisible down to dust. They're looking for patterns, she says one evening. You nod. They'll find them if they want to. They already have, she replies. Now they're just choosing which ones to believe. The steward begins sending messengers, not to the crown, not to the church, to other villages, spreading stories about your village, about how unrest has been quelled, how new order is taking root. He speaks of reformed citizens and productive silence. He says a revolt is over. He says the land is grateful. And it works, or so it seems. One afternoon, a group of travelers passes through, dressed in soft colors, faces down, hands folded. They stop to buy bread, compliment the steward's efforts, and move on. But one leaves behind a carved stone on your doorstep, a flame in the shape of a root. You hold in your palm and feel it burn without heat. Your strange cultural tidbit. To counter the steward's narrative, villagers created silent signals for external visitors. One of the most common was a loaf of bread with a hollow core, meant to symbolize that what appeared full was, in truth, empty. These loaves were sold openly, often flavored with ash or bitter herbs to make them unappetizing. Buying one was a sign. We know, we see, we remember. You begin to notice more of them. On carts, in markets, left near wells. The world is not convinced. The world is waiting. One night, you gather under the oak. A quiet meeting. No torches. No children. Just you, Eli, Sarah, and 5 others still brave enough to speak. You talk not of rebellion, but of retelling. What happens if no one remembers the truth? What happens if the steward's version becomes the only version? Sarah says, then we must be louder, but without raising our voices. Eli places a stone in the center of the circle. It's cracked. On one side, a crow. On the other, a doorway. He says we open it, and no one laughs. Historians still debate whether there was ever a coordinated counter-narrative movement among post-revolt villages. Some say the evidence is too scattered, tokens, songs, carvings, bits of oral tradition. Others argue that the scattering itself was the evidence, an intentional fragmentation to make the truth unkillable. One scholar wrote, you can silence a speaker, but not an echo made 100 mouths. The decision is made gently, no war, no declaration, just retelling. Each villager will carry a piece of the truth, some in carvings, some in pie, some in the names they give their children, some in the stories they whisper into the ears of crows. The next day, you hang a listening cloth on your window. Rosemary, onion skin, a touch of mint. A neighbor passes. He sees it. He nods. And for the first time in weeks, he smiles. Let's rest here, not in fear, but in quiet defiance. The kind that grows like moss between stone. The steward leaves, not with fire or fanfare, not even with a final speech. Just one morning he is gone. His boots no longer rest on the chapel floor. His blade, ceremonial or not, no longer glints in the window. The 3 men he brought with him leave too, quietly, like water withdrawing after a long tide. No one asks why. No one celebrates, because no one trusts silence anymore. Instead, you wait. 3 days pass, then 4. You expect a replacement, reinforcements, maybe a letter nailed to the chapel door, but none come. Just a slow return of birdsong, of windows creaking open, of breath held too long finally, carefully being exhaled. You gather in the square, not all at once, not in ceremony. Just enough people standing at the same time that the moment becomes real. Eli speaks first. Of course he does. They've gone, he says, tapping his fingers against his walking stick like a drum. Either because they were told to or because they realized we weren't listening anymore. Sarah adds, or because they got what they wanted. You glance around. The list, the names, 12 still gone, still out there, scattered like seeds. Or ash. You ask the question no one wants to say aloud, did we win? The silence that follows is so full it almost sounds like thunder. Here's your major historical fact. The aftermath of rural suppressions in 15th century England was often ambiguous, with no formal declarations, no marked victories, and no official surrenders. Many villages simply endured until the pressure eased. Over time, the lack of records about many of these revolts wasn't just coincidence. It was intentional omission. Authorities avoided writing about what they couldn't control. And the villagers? They preserved their history, not in ink, but in practice. You walk to the oak. You touch its bark. You listen, and what you feel is not triumph. It's resistance becoming ritual. The tokens remain. So do the pies. So do the names whispered before sleep. One evening, a child asks you what the carved stone in the center of the square means. The crow on one side, the doorway on the other. You kneel. You say, that's the memory, and that's the way through it. And somehow, the child understands. That week, the baker invents a new kind of bread. It's round, with a hollow middle. Inside, a folded cloth with symbols made of dough pressed flat. A flame, a spiral, and a tree. He calls it remembrance bread. No one eats it, but it sells out every market day. Your strange cultural tidbit. For a brief time after the suppression, several English villages began crafting ritual foods not meant to be consumed. These memory loaves were placed on shelves, windowsills, and even graves, not as offerings, but as commitments to truth, to neighbors, to the idea that forgetting is not a form of peace. You take to walking the roads again. Not far, just enough to listen. Other villages are quieter now, but the quiet feels earned. Eyes meet more often. Tokens change hands discreetly. Children know to name crows, and old men carve in symbols instead of letters. One village offers you a carved cup filled with cold mint water. You ask what the symbol etched into its rim means. The woman says, "It means the story didn't end." You sip. It tastes like the first truth you ever heard. Historians still debate the long-term effects of these rural resistances. Some claim they led directly to broader reforms centuries later: land rights, common law, protections for the poor. Others insist they vanished, absorbed into the mythos of peasantry. But one thing remains strangely agreed upon. The names of these villages rarely appear in royal ledgers again, as though, having spoken once, they were allowed to fade on their own terms. Back in your village, the tree has grown slightly. You think it's your imagination. But one morning, a branch blooms early. 3 small leaves in the shape of a flame. You sit beneath it, not to plan, not to wait, just to be. And for the first time in a long time, the stillness feels honest. Let's breathe here. The wind is warm, and you are remembered. You wake with sunlight on your face. Not the harsh kind that demands motion, but the golden sort that gently insists you're still part of this world. The kind of light that lands on skin like a whispered, "You're safe now." There's a fire already lit in the square, not because it's cold, but because it's comforting. The smoke curls slow and fragrant, damp oak and dried lavender, maybe a hint of last night's pie crust still clinging to the embers. You stretch your legs and walk barefoot to the edge of the garden. Your garden, because that's what it's become. No one said so. No lines were drawn. But one by one, neighbors began leaving clippings on your doorstep. Seeds tucked in cloth. A shy tomato vine wrapped around your fence like it had always belonged. You sit beside it now, toes in the earth, and hum a tune you don't remember learning. And that's the thing, isn't it? The story never really had a beginning. You didn't wake one day and decide to be a speaker, or a watcher, or a keeper of bread that isn't eaten in names that aren't written down. You just follow the path that appeared in front of you, and somehow it led here. Here's your major historical fact. Some medieval villages created informal councils of remembrance, small groups tasked with maintaining oral histories, births, losses, betrayals, oaths, through ritual retellings. They weren't officially recognized, but they endured, and sometimes the most enduring histories are the ones no one ever asked for. Eli still carves. His latest tokens are shaped like open hands, one side smooth, the other ridged like tree bark. He says they're for passing forward, without letting go. You place one on your windowsill. Sarah has taken up residence near the hills. People say she watches the crossroads now, not to block them, but to name them, to remind travelers that direction has weight, that turning left instead of right can still carry meaning long after the dust settles. And you write, not with ink, not even on paper, but in gesture. You walk slowly when others rush. You laugh quietly when fear rises. You listen longer than most think necessary. And when children ask where the old steward went, you smile and say, "He forgot how to hear us." Your strange cultural tidbit. In post-suppression villages, some elders created bedtime rituals where stories were passed not in words, but in silence broken by symbols. A fire might be stoked in 3 short bursts to mean home. A stone placed by a child's pillow might mean you are safe. The language was never written down. It didn't need to be. The children knew. That was the point. You sit again beneath the oak. You notice someone's carved a new token into its trunk, a spiral wrapped inside a seed. It's rough, unpracticed, made by someone new to the work. And yet, somehow, it says everything. You lean back, arms crossed behind your head, and close your eyes, not to sleep, not yet, but to listen. And what you hear isn't birdsong, or footsteps, or even wind. It's the sound of something once lost, quietly growing again. Let the world settle now. Let the edges blur, like mist over morning fields, like old ink smudged by time and thumbprints. The story is still there, etched in symbols, whispered in winds, resting beneath the roots of an oak older than memory. But for now it can sleep. You breathe in deeply, and the air feels thick with moss and bread, with rain that knows your name. A crow lands somewhere nearby, not to warn, not to wait, just to be. You feel it in your chest, the gentle rhythm of a world that keeps spinning, even when you choose stillness. The villagers are quiet tonight. Doors creak closed with care, not fear. Footsteps are light. Fires burn low. And in a dozen homes, a dozen quiet hands place a final token on the hearth. Shapes carved not for meaning, but for memory. You're no longer needed to watch, but you're still welcome to stay. Maybe tomorrow you'll plant something new, or carve a shape no one's seen before, or teach a child the importance of 3 stones and a feather. But tonight, you let the blanket fall over your thoughts. The stars blink slowly overhead, like old friends saying one last thing before leaving the room. And as your breath evens out, soft and sure, you feel it, the long, quiet truth of a village that remembered itself. You did not win a war. You outlasted a forgetting. And now, finally, you rest. Good night. If you enjoyed the story, feel free to like, subscribe, and let us know where and when you're listening from. Sweet dreams from the edge of a quiet battlefield.